Welcome all to this first webinar in a series of webinars that the United Nations Volunteers is organizing as part of the dissemination of the State of the World's Volunteerism Report 2026. So we are very happy that you have managed to join us, and I see the number is growing. So we are very happy that there is this interest to engage with the report and its contents. Today is going to be a great moment because we have we've invited the strong consortium of speakers who were involved in the preparation of the report. I don't know whether I can start now or give 2 minutes for others who are joining. I see the number is going up, but we can start. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the Deputy Executive Coordinator of the United Nations Volunteers, Louise Chamberlain, to give us a few words of encouragement in the form of open remarks for this webinar. And then thereafter, we go into the discussion and presentation. Louise, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tapiwa, and good afternoon or good morning or good evening, I suppose, to participants from around the globe. It's a pleasure for me to be here to welcome you all to this global webinar series. This is the first in a series on the State of the World's Volunteerism Report for 2026, which was prepared by UN volunteers together with Northumbria University, University of Pretoria, and ILO, and launched in December 2025. As you may know, this is a flagship report of UNV that we publish every 3 years to capture the latest evidence and insight on volunteerism around the world. The aim of the report is to show how volunteers help communities respond to today's development challenge and how their efforts contribute to achieving SDGs, but to do this through an approach of research and consultation. So this 2026 edition focuses on a theme that is very timely and essential: how we measure volunteerism. And this focus makes all the more difference as this is the year where the world is marking the International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development, or IVY as we call it. You see the nice logo on the slide here. And this is a moment where the world is called on to provide greater recognition of the role that volunteers play in building more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable societies. So it's great that we have a picture here of the evidence, because as you all know, what we can quantify and substantiate can get more recognition and be acknowledged as also in terms of a quantum of contribution. And today's session, as I mentioned already, it opens a series of webinars, and we're going to explore different aspects of the report and its findings. I know many of you might already be asking, why are you dedicating a whole report only on measurement? Well, the answer to that is simple. Governments, communities, and development partners all around the world want to understand the value of volunteerism. They want not just conceptual value, but clear evidence of how volunteer efforts strengthen social cohesion, support essential services, and contribute to peace and development. So policy makers, they need this evidence to make informed decisions about investing and integrating volunteerism in national development plan. And I think you will all agree with me that today, volunteerism is under-recognized. It makes a much bigger contribution than so far is captured in official policies and documentation and so on and so forth. So that's why we took on this complex but very vital task of examining how volunteerism can be measured and measured well. And measurement is also ultimately about visibility. So when we measure, we make volunteer contributions more visible. We give governments the evidence that they need to invest, and we give volunteer organizations and volunteer hosting organizations the tools to demonstrate the impact. And last but not least, of course, we give communities the opportunity to tell the story, the full story of how they make contributions to development or how they develop themselves. So today's opening seminar, webinar, will walk us through the report's key messages and recommendations, including new global and regional estimates of volunteer rates and the Global Index of Volunteer Engagement, which we pertinently call GIVE for short. It also sets the stage for the upcoming sessions that is going to explore each of these specific themes in greater depth. The report also reminds us that there's no single way of measuring volunteering. In fact, it offers practical tools, examples, and guidance that countries and organizations can adapt to their respective contexts. And that's one of the report's greatest strengths, that there is a menu of options here, and there are also a multitude of good practices that the report discusses. So, colleagues, we're very honored to be joined today by our research partners from Northumbria University, the University of Pretoria, and the International Labour Organization, ILO, who have played a really central role in developing this edition of the SWVR together with our knowledge and advisory team within UNV. I hope that today's discussion will inspire you all to explore the report further, to reflect more on its findings, and consider how its recommendations can be applied in your work and in your communities, and perhaps also be the basis for further discussions or measurement wherever you're based. Please let us know how we can support you in this regard. We very much appreciate your presence here today. We look forward to your active engagement during the webinar and hopefully also throughout the coming webinars, where we will go deeper in the report findings. So with that, once again, sincere thanks for choosing to be with us this afternoon. And I wish you a really great session. And thank you, Tapiwa, Mr. Chair, for the floor. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Louise. We appreciate your kind words and words of encouragement. And once again, I would like to welcome the participants who have joined us. Quite a strong participation of interested parties there at almost 300. So we are quite thrilled that people have interest in this report. First things first, let me start by once again introducing our partners. I would like to start by introducing the Northumbria Research Consortium, who have worked with UNV to prepare this report. I'll start with Professor Matt Dale-Smith, who is the co-director of the Center for International Development and the director of the Global Development Futures Initiative at Northumbria University. You are most welcome, Matt. And also, I'd like to introduce Professor Samuel Manda, head of the Department of Statistics at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and the principal investigator for the Global Volunteer Index, the GIVE. Welcome, Professor. Then I also would like to introduce our good friend from our sister UN agents, Vladimir Ganta, who works with the International Labour Organization. Thank you. We just call him Vlad for short. Thank you, Vlad, for joining, and you're most welcome. Let me also acknowledge Dr. Bianca Fadel from the Northumbria University, as well as Ms. Maxine Pofu, who are part of the Northumbria University Research Consortium. I cannot proceed without acknowledging my colleague here, Emilia Asadova, who is the team lead for evidence, who has played a central role in ensuring that this report was produced and published on time. Now, having said that, we're now getting thick into the webinar. We would like to start with the basics. I think in the field of education, we start with the known to the unknown. We want to know quickly how much we are aware of the issues around volunteering trends and how these reflect to the report itself. Derek, would you like to post the two questions? I would like to know, for example, how much you know about volunteer measurement. And those are the two questions. If you can kindly respond on those two questions. And we would like to gauge your knowledge of measurement of volunteering. The first question, if I may read it, how confident are you or your organization in measuring the impact of volunteering? Just a single choice there from those four options. I'll take a few minutes to listen, but as I do that, I would like to inform you kindly that we are live streaming so that those who are unable to be with us, they can also join from wherever they are, and that this webinar is being recorded. Towards the end of this session, we'll have some question and answer so that you can respond to questions that may come up. So let's go to the questions. Paused. I'm talking to myself. Uh, Possibly, I think here we already have gone through the two questions. I'm not going to, it's really going to show the responses. Those are the responses for the two questions. That there is some very good element of volunteer measurement understanding. People are a little confident about it, and quite many are still not very confident. Well, a few are very confident about it, but they have fair knowledge and confident about it. I think this is encouraging about volunteering. And then the second question, what is the biggest barrier to measuring volunteer impact in your context? And can you raise the bar, Derek? It's on the computer. Perfect. These are the responses. It's encouraging to see where there are gaps and where we need to put emphasis, like the lack of knowledge and tools, which, without any coincidence, this is the issues that this report has addressed: the lack of knowledge on how to measure volunteering and the tools that can be applied. And also the issue of no agreed standards, very important point, because across the world, plus or minus 90 countries, they've measured volunteering using different methodologies. And the data that they get there is very difficult to compare because they've used different approaches, different tools, and so forth. Interesting. I'll close it there. And this was some primer for us to get into the discussion. I'll then, with your permission, ask Professor Matt Smith to come in, and he, in his address, will address some of the questions, some of the responses that have come through. Over to you, Professor Matt Smith.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Tapiwa, and hello, everyone. It's really nice to see so many people here. Before I make some comments, just a quick reiteration that this was a team effort. And I'm delighted to be joined by Bianca and Maxine today, but there are a huge range of people from across the world. You'll hear something about them today, and some of them are on the call as well. So it's very important. We recognize that this is a collective contribution. And that's also really important in relation to the short piece of feedback that you've just given. Because one of the things I noticed in what people said was, well, I'm not sure I have the knowledge or tools, quite a high percentage saying that, and about 19% saying we don't have the budget. And I want to open this by saying there are two ways we could address that. We could say, well, oh, this is a blank sheet, nobody's got any knowledge, and oh, we need to find an enormous amount of money. And in the current moment, that's not going to happen. But what I hope you can take from this initial webinar is actually many of us have lots of tools and knowledge and ideas that we can use to measure volunteering. It's just that some of that knowledge and some of those tools haven't always been very well recognized. So when we say, I don't have the knowledge, one of the problems with that is that who is seen as having the knowledge has often been rather narrow. And there has been an assumption that volunteer measurement is about elite academic professors. And it, of course, isn't. And I hope you can take that away from what we're about to discuss. And that's why I wanted to mention the fact that although I'm here speaking, I'm probably rather stereotypically white male professor being the first person to speak. Actually, this is the work of people from hugely diverse backgrounds and experiences and skills and locations and geographies, and that must be our starting point. So why focus on measurement now? So there's been over a decade of SWVR research looking at issues like inclusion, resilience, governance, equality. And we all know, those of us who care very much about volunteering and participate in volunteering, that volunteering has really positive impacts across those things and many others. But actually, to be able to show that is harder. And there has been a growing request from lots of stakeholders that we need to get better at measuring how volunteering contributes to those things. Secondly, we know that volunteering is enormous. So if you look in the report that we've just been working on with colleagues, the ILO elsewhere, 2.1 billion people, 34.5% of working age adults across the globe engage in volunteer work. And those numbers are important, but also there are other numbers and measures that are important. Those are the numbers and measures that people know in their everyday lives because they work with everyone in their community to do things. It is at an enormous scale. The third point about why is this important is because volunteers are on the front lines of change. And that is both a positive thing because volunteers are shaping the world that we're moving into. They're doing incredible things, innovating, working with others, really shaping how societies and cultures and economies are organized. But they're also on the front lines of change, which are perhaps less optimistic. They're on the front lines of climate change. They're having to deal with the impact of cyclones in West Bengal, for example. They're having to deal with the impact of conflict. But they are at all points on the front lines of change. And we need to understand how their work has an impact and what kinds of things we could be doing to support them. The other reason volunteer measurement is important in this current moment is innovation. When people first started thinking about volunteer measurement, it was under a fairly narrow way of thinking about how do we measure something. But across the world, and we have really been able to embrace this and discover this during SWVR, people are doing amazing things around how they measure the volunteering that they're participating in, that their organization is engaging with. They're using all sorts of innovative methods. They're using interesting forms of technology. They're using really clever ways of bringing communities together. They're thinking about what role AI might play. So there has been huge innovation in volunteer measurement. So taken together, these are the reasons why we should be focusing on volunteer measurement now. And that is why, going back to Louise's comments at the start, why focus only on volunteer measurement? And it is because it is so fundamental to this whole landscape of volunteer participation and volunteer work. Why do we need to improve it? And this goes back to my point right at the start, and I feel this very, very strongly personally, and is one of the reasons we wanted to work on this project with UNV, the ILO, and Pretoria. Traditionally, volunteering measurement was seen as the kind of the preserve of researchers, of academics, of volunteer measurement specialists. But actually, if we step away from highly technical approaches to volunteer measurement, measurement isn't just for researchers, it's for everyone invested in stronger and more inclusive communities. Because if measurement is about understanding how the thing that you or your community or your team of volunteers are having an impact, and understanding that so that we can make sure it's working well, we can make sure volunteers are being supported, we can make sure we're maximizing the impacts of volunteers, then measurement is for everybody. And there are ways that everybody can get involved in measurement. You don't need a PhD or a master's or to be a professor. Volunteer measurement is for everyone, and it needs to be for everyone. It also matters because having those right kinds of volunteer measurement mean that data and insight and information can improve policy and investment decisions. It means that decision makers, who might be in national planning offices, they might be in NGOs, they might be a small community organization, can have the evidence they need to invest in the right ways. Because let us remember, of course, that volunteering is never really free. You need investment to make it work well, and to target that investment, particularly in the current climate of highly scarce resources globally, we need accurate knowledge and insight to target those investments well and maximize the impact that those investments have. The other point is that measurement isn't just about measuring volunteers. It's not measurement of volunteers. Measurement can be for volunteers, because good measurement that is attuned to what's going on means it's an opportunity for communities to tell their own stories. It gives people power to say, this is what I do, and I can evidence this. I can show you this is why what we do is important, and this is why you should value us, and this is why not only you should respect what we do, but we should be visible. There are amazing things that go on in the world that volunteers do, and we don't see most of them. Being able to measure and account for them using all different kinds of contextually appropriate methods means people are visible. And that is particularly the case for volunteers who are already maybe from communities who are excluded and whose voices are heard less. We need to be attentive to how those things intersect and make sure that measurement captures everybody's contribution. And then finally, go beyond numbers. So traditionally, when we talk about volunteer measurement, people think it's about numbers. How many hours, how much, what's the economic value? But for any of you who've been on this call, who's been a volunteer, we all know that volunteering means more than that. All the research and evidence that we at Northumbria do and other places do shows that volunteering isn't just about hours. It isn't about numbers. It's about what things mean to people, what things mean not only to the volunteer, but the person that volunteer has engaged with. It's about the things they've learned. It's about the impacts that it's had on them, on their children, on their families, on their communities, on a young person who's been displaced, on someone who's a victim of war. The numbers simply do not tell that story. So SWVR is this time really making clear the numbers matter, but they are not the only story. Now, finally, I want to move on to three really important things. And the first is that there's amazing work, and there has been amazing work going on volunteer measurement for decades. But there are still some really important people missing. If we look at volunteering that takes place outside formal structures that governments or states recognize, that big NGOs recognize, if you think of volunteering that is people quietly coming together of a weekend to do a bit of plastics cleanup, people doing something, very informal, volunteering measurement does not count those forms of volunteering. There are lots of volunteers who have been missing from the ways in which we measure and account for volunteering. Secondly, the data and evidence on volunteering, in other words, where measurement has taken place and where it hasn't taken place, is highly uneven. So only 1 in 3 countries has measured volunteer work through national statistics since 2008. And most of those countries have been high-income countries. So we could take two things from that. We could say, well, everyone should now try and use those same forms of measurement that high-income countries have used, so we can all be the same. But I would suggest that's highly unrealistic. Those forms of measurement have come from the experiences and histories of those places and are based on the levels of affluence within those places. So we need to be talking about forms of measurement that everyone can use. That includes lower income countries, that includes smaller organizations, that includes diverse kinds of people who are involving with volunteering who are not ones who have the benefit of those kind of high income contexts where you can do large scale complex surveys and analysis. And then finally, so much of volunteer measurement and so much of the thinking about volunteering generally in the recent decades has come from ideas and experiences that are largely originating in Europe, North America, and Australia. In other words, when we present tools in the past saying this is a great tool for volunteer measurement, very often they have not worked, unsurprisingly, in different contexts. And yet at the same time, there are some amazing tools that are used in contexts outside Europe, North America, and so on, that are brilliant. They're sensitive to context, but we haven't seen them. They've not been made visible. So we need context-sensitive tools, not this is how you do volunteer measurement, but these are the ways in which you can capture different measurements of volunteering that ensure that diverse experiences and diverse voices are captured in everything we do. And I'm going to hand over now to Bianca.
Thank you, Matt. And more than anything, as we have been saying, this webinar is an invitation for us all to be thinking together and to be actually taking the report as a starting point for the conversations that are much needed across the sector and involving all interest groups, including volunteers themselves. So we just wanted to give you all a sense of the SWVR report structure in case you haven't had a chance yet to check it out. The report is available for download. You have a QR code here on the slide and also the website where you can find it in English at the moment while it's being translated to other languages. And if you see here the structure of the report, it is divided in 3 parts. We start by setting the scene. So it starts with this big question of why volunteering measurement matters now and why we're talking about it across this whole report, echoing what Louise and Matt have already said in their introduction. We move on to the state of the art of volunteer measurement to understand how measurement has been evolving and continuously changing over time to incorporate diverse methods, diverse insights, and how that understanding is really important for us to start thinking about it and considering the innovations and the different approaches that can be used to capture this impact of volunteers. Chapter 3 brings this updated global estimates of volunteer work. You're going to hear a little bit about it from the colleagues in this call today. And then we move on to the part 2 of the report, which is the thematic chapters, the core of the understanding of measurement from the individual perspective in chapter 4. So the impacts both on the benefits and also the risks and the challenges that are faced by volunteers themselves, and how to capture that, how to measure the impact on individual health, well-being, skills, and employability. Moving to capturing the contributions of volunteering to development outcomes, particularly health, education, the impact of volunteering in tackling inequalities across the globe. So how to understand that as well. And we then move on to this forward-looking chapter 6, which is about volunteer measurement in the context of overlapping crises. We all know and understand that in practice, volunteers are tackling multiple challenges at the same time, especially in the context of the climate emergency. So how can we think about measurement in a way that is not putting crises into silos or separate boxes, but actually understanding how volunteers are responding to them at the same time and facing multiple issues at the same time in their work. The final part of the report we're going to also touch upon today and have more time to explore in next upcoming webinars. So it is about the Global Index of Volunteer Engagement, the GIVE, and the colleagues from the Pretoria team will be talking about it. And then the final recommendations that are, again, for everyone, not only specific groups, but really trying to understand what we can focus on to be able to emphasize the policy impact of volunteers across sectors as well. So very briefly, the way that this work has been organized and prepared has been really a distinctive way of responding to the very challenges of volunteer measurement. So as we have already mentioned, this has been a truly collaborative endeavor involving Northumbria University, University of Pretoria, and the International Labour Organization, with the leadership of the UNV in this process. And these equitable partnerships, they have run across the very design of the report, the individuals who were involved from Global South, Global North, and different countries and backgrounds to be able to bring these diverse perspectives into the writing and the understanding of this whole report, following this robust ethical framework, so integrity on the data collection and data management, and also being able to include diverse voices in a way that accounts for the importance of respecting everyone in the process of producing a report like this. Finally, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Maxine, who will be talking a little bit about how we have approached case studies and this collaborative way of understanding examples from around the world that have informed this report.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bianca. As Bianca has already highlighted, that this was a collaborative endeavor that we did, just the writing of the report and as well as collecting the case studies that we use in the report. So between March and April last year, we had an open call for case studies, and I'm sure some of the people on this call would have submitted case studies just showcasing the incredible work that people are doing to measure the impact and value of volunteering. So these, in our selection of the ones that we used in the report, we aligned them with the thematic focus of each of the chapters. So this is another invitation for you to dive into the report and just see some of the examples that we use in the research in the report. And the case studies that we use have a global reach spanning across individual experiences of volunteer measurement, organizational ones, from volunteer involving organizations to community-based organizations and government institutions, as well as academics. So throughout the report, we have over 100 examples that we use. 16 of these are case study boxes from the submissions that we received. And we also have 20 in-text mentions of these case studies, alongside over 70 examples from policy and academic work that is already existing that we use as secondary evidence. So I'll move on to just give a high-level summary of some of the key highlights of the case studies and the different methodologies that we cover in the report. I do need to highlight that this is, as I've already said, high-level highlights. So please, not only do we invite you to dive into the report to see an in-depth, I guess, exploration of these examples, but we invite you to the next webinars that we're going to have in the series, where we'll do a deeper dive into some of these examples and additional ones that are not mentioned here. So as Matt has mentioned, that the value of volunteering in economic terms is important, but it's not the only way to measure the impact of volunteering. So some of the examples that we use in the report just show economic valuation and how you can do this, especially now in the age where investment decisions are actually calculated in financial terms. So in page 66, we have an example from the volunteer investment and value audit tool that was, I think, founded by the Institute of Volunteering Research, which is a cost-benefit analysis tool that in simple terms just calculates what do we put in volunteering and what do we get out of it. So it could be in terms of inputs in operational costs and just management of volunteer programs, as well as comparing it to the roles that volunteers play and evaluating that against the time that they spend volunteering in economic terms. This is a useful tool in gathering evidence and data that just supports investment decisions, in the sense that it helps realize what further support is needed for volunteers. But at the same time, it's quite useful, especially in low resource settings, to see how we can optimize the cost and the investments that are made into volunteering. Moving on to storytelling approaches. This is an example from Volunteer Service Abroad, which in addition to the 360-degree approach that they use to use quantitative and qualitative forms of measurement, they have embedded their volunteer measurement into the cultural practices in the Pacific, specifically, to Talanoa and Storian, which are storytelling and conversational approaches that are rooted in local languages, facilitating conversations from local volunteers to the communities that they serve, such that volunteering measurement is not just restricted to the organization or just external standardized forms of measurement, but making sure that it's actually contextually relevant and the people that benefit and participate from volunteering are able to communicate the value of volunteering for themselves. Then we also have examples of longitudinal studies. One that's on page 30 is an example from Mexico, which is a longitudinal study that was studied in 2005, and to date there have been 4 editions of it. This has been quite useful in tracking the evolution of volunteering over time, including the definitions of volunteering and making sure that they're quite inclusive to forms of volunteering that were historically excluded, such as informal volunteering and giving, and also challenging assumptions that were previously made about volunteering that are quite not based on evidence, especially in demographic terms. I think this particular example shows that there was an assumption that more women volunteered than men, but evidence actually shows that there is gender parity when it comes to volunteering in Mexico. And it's also captured new forms of volunteering that are coming up in more recent years that were not there necessarily in 2005, such as online forms of engagement and episodic volunteering. We also have participatory and co-designed metrics. An example from the coordinating committee of International Volunteer Service that just shows that in as much as international, especially short-term international volunteering is usually celebrated, it's rarely systematically measured. So through co-designed pre and post-test surveys alongside qualitative examples from over focus group discussions and interviews in over 31 countries and surveys conducted in 91 countries, created evidence that is co-developed in terms of indicators that were co-designed by volunteers themselves and the communities that that benefit from volunteering, as well as the organizations and academics, making sure that not only are indicators just imposed on communities by academics, but also just ensuring that there's collaboration such that it's locally relevant and there's local buy-in, as well as being able to translate that information into evidence that can be viable for policy audiences as well. We have another example from the context of Uganda, where the research team working with displaced young people in Uganda formed advisory boards in terms of formulating the research questions and the definition of volunteering that's contextually relevant, instead of bringing definitions that do not necessarily translate to the local context. This was quite useful in terms of just seeing that the volunteers are actually impacted by this very same crisis that they are affected by. So volunteering actually does not exist outside of the crisis that volunteers address. This is a particularly interesting example because of the 3,000 young refugees that were engaged in the study revealed that 70% of those young people participated in some form of volunteering. This is, I think, statistics and evidence that would have otherwise been missed because measurement is not typically quite feasible in crisis settings. I'll leave it at the final point, which is on digital platforms, also in the context of crisis, and in this case, overlapping crisis in the context of Bangladesh, where young people from the AIM Initiative Foundation, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, were also impacted by flooding in their communities, and they devised digital storytelling where volunteers would capture their stories in just narratives and upload their updates through digital portfolios, where they communicate not only how they're contributing to alleviate the crisis, but also how they're impacted. And this has actually been helpful in fostering collaboration between formal and informal volunteers in this context. So the key thing, I guess, that comes also from the report is that volunteers are not just subjects of evaluation, as Matt has already mentioned, but they also shape how their work is understood and valued. So just to keep in mind that volunteers are also co-creators in how we approach measurement. So I'll pass it on to our colleagues from the ILO.
Hello, everyone. I hope, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. I will continue this webinar from a different perspective. We've heard a lot of important things about the need to measure, why it's important to measure, why it's important to produce statistics. And most of all, it's about visibility. And I think the global estimates, which were for the first time produced by law, made this possible to make volunteers' work visible by producing this estimate saying that 2.1 billion people, or about 35% of people aged 15 years and over, volunteer or engage in volunteer work every month on average during a year. I'm sure you've seen these numbers already. I will not insist on explaining the numbers. You can see there are big differences sometimes between regions. There are also some differences by sex. And there are two types of explanations for these differences. One type is related to what happens in reality. It's about the context in which people live, in which people volunteer, social, economic, demographic context. And the other type of explanation is the measurement, how measurement is done in different countries. And this was already mentioned. Countries apply different approaches to measurement, and those measurements are not always strictly comparable. And when producing these estimates, me and my colleague, we had to think about ways how to, in a way, harmonize all these different approaches. And huge work was done to specifically to do this, to make possible the production of estimates which are based on a more harmonized approach. Of course, we made some assumptions, but the best way to produce estimates would be to have data produced using the same approach. However, this is not a very easy thing to accomplish, not only for volunteer work, but also for other indicators which are well known, like employment, unemployment. Although we have made a lot of progress in producing global estimates using similar approaches on other indicators related to employment, we still have problems. And there are more problems when we speak about the measurement of volunteer work, which is not always a priority on countries' lists when it comes to official measurement, specifically because of the reasons you participants mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. There are no resources, there are no tools, there is no knowledge, so there is no capacity to produce official volunteer work estimates. And this is one of the key areas UNV and ILO are working to make possible the production of official volunteer work statistics. Okay, so another key message from these global estimates, in addition to the big number of people involved in volunteer work, is that most volunteer work happens not through organizations. It happens directly between people. So, and this is what we call direct volunteering. When people volunteer individually, they are not organized by anyone, whether formal or informal organizations. This is type of help happening between provided to neighbors, to friends, to strangers. Could be ad hoc, activities, not necessarily something which happens regularly, or could be regular activities happening within communities. So we knew about this from existing data, but this is the first time when in global estimates we can highlight this. We can show that this is the main way help, assistance is delivered. And it's, as was said previously, the scale is massive. If you think about how this type of work is embedded in people's lives. So I'm sure that if not all, but most participants following this webinar, almost 200-300 people, I think most of you helped at least once during the, let's say, last month, someone who is a friend, a neighbor, without being involved in any organized volunteering, because this is part of the life. And especially in countries with low income, where people have to work a lot, like many hours to earn a decent income, or they have then fewer capacities to buy or procure services, goods. So in that kind of economic context, people rely on each other to produce goods, to provide services to each other through mutual aid. And this is one big part of this kind of volunteering, often called informal, in which organizations are not involved. And if only official data provided by organizations are used, then this kind of work stays invisible. And when we speak about this direct volunteering, it includes like any production of goods or of services that people in which people engage without expecting to be remunerated somehow. They are not forced to do it; they just choose to do it because they want to help. So this could be anything. From just to give you examples, people who just care about the environment in their communities, they could go and clean the streets. They could go and take care of street dogs. They could deliver water to elderly in their neighborhood. And I've seen such examples in different countries where I was testing the tools that we produce to measure volunteer work. It stays invisible, it stays of the official radars, so no one noticed except for the people within the communities. And during my work, when often discussing with people who do this kind of volunteering, they would say, well, this is part of my life, this is what I do, this is how we take care of each other. They wouldn't think about this kind of work as being volunteer work. For them, volunteer work is something different. It's something that people with badges with the name of some NGOs on their t-shirts do when they come to help them. So for most people, direct volunteering, the one that happens within communities, informally, unstructured, is a survival strategy. And not just in countries with low income, in countries with high income, it happens as well. And there are examples of very high shares of participation in this kind of work in Northern Europe, where people gather and they do different things, but they also help each other to cope with different problems, solve different problems, because this is the way of their life. And this usually makes a big difference on people's well-being. In some countries, this helps keeping people out of extreme poverty. In other countries, it helps people, it helps maintain a better mental well-being. So for different reasons, communities around the globe, they do the same thing. Okay, now to speak a little bit about the methodology of the measurement. I wasn't the only one working on this. Actually, most of the work was done, one of my colleagues, Marta, who is our expert on data modeling. And she used several data sources with data from global databases to produce these estimates. Just to give you an idea, to produce one estimate of the global number of people volunteering, the model had to run for a couple of hours to produce that number, because a huge amount of data and different a complex algorithm was used to build those estimates. Now, what's evident that compared to the 2022 estimate, the 2026 estimate is significantly higher. And the answer to this to the question why this increase is not because there was a huge increase in the number of people volunteering on this planet. It is because the measurement was improved. When producing estimates, we had access to new data produced by improved data collection tools. And this made a huge difference, especially because data came from Global South, where we applied the ILO module, which is a set of questions for surveys, designed specifically to be able to capture more reliably direct volunteering, or so-called cultural volunteering, which is the prevalent form of volunteer work. So this is why when you compare estimates from 2022 and 2026, keep in mind that this is not about a sudden increase in the number of people volunteering. It's about an improved measurement. Well, we don't know whether the number of people volunteering also increased. This cannot be excluded, but we cannot confirm that that this happened. What we know for sure is that we used better data. Now, another reason why these numbers are big is because we're applying a definition of volunteer work which was agreed by all countries at a conference dedicated to establishing standards on statistics of work. We call this ICLS, is the International Conference of Labor Statisticians, which is organized every 5 years by the ILO. And at this conference, governments from all over the world, members of the organization, statisticians, gather, discuss, and approve international standards on how to measure different things. So volunteer work was one of the topics which was discussed in 2013. And at that conference, standards for the international measurement of volunteer work were established. So we're using that definition, and according to that definition, to be classified as a volunteer, a person has to work at least for 1 hour during 4 weeks to provide services or produce goods for someone else who is not a member of his or her family, without expecting to be remunerated and without any legal constraint, without being forced to do this kind of work. So this it's about work out of free will. So this is a definition which covers a wide set of activities. It was established as specifically to be able to capture all types of volunteering, which were not usually captured by other definitions applied, especially in developed countries from Europe, North America, and so on. So this is another reason why this estimate is bigger, is higher. And as I also mentioned, we had access to new data thanks to a survey conducted by UNV last year, which provided material for producing better estimates. Now, at the end, I would say that from this work, we've learned that, as you could see, the scale of volunteering is important. It's not a marginal phenomenon. It's huge if you actually pay attention at what's happening informally, directly between people at community level. And if better estimates would be produced all over the world, I think the globalist, these numbers will be higher. And it should be recognized that as volunteering is important for people's well-being, so these numbers are also important to make visible that contribution. And as I told you, direct volunteering should not be marginalized or should not be forgotten. It should actually put at the center of the discussions, and policies should be developed around how to help for that direct volunteering, contributing better to people's well-being, to solving important problems within communities, and contributing to development. And of course, to be able to do so, countries should be investing in producing official volunteer work statistics, applying the latest international standards, which were specifically developed to make visible volunteer work in all its forms. We're currently working with a couple of countries which are implementing the tools we developed. And we hope that for the next round of estimates, we will have even more information that will help us produce better estimates. Thank you.
Ms. Amanda, are you there? Hello, the University of Pretoria team.
He's here. She was here.
Professor Amanda. Hello, it looks like Professor Amanda, are you there? Please, are you connected? Please go ahead, Professor Amanda. We already are running short. We can't hear you, Professor Amanda. It looks like we are having a technical challenge there with Professor Amanda. We can see him, but we can't hear him. Professor Amanda, I think you can join us in time, but let me just summarize the two slides that Professor Amanda was going to present. As you might be aware, for the very first time, UNV and its partners made a great effort to initiate the preparation of a global index of volunteering, and the one that we call GIVE. This was a very engaging and very challenging effort, because we all know that the key challenge we have in the volunteering constituency is that volunteerism is undermeasured and under-researched, and more often absent from official statistical systems. So the index, the GIVE index, tries to go beyond volunteer headcounts and hours. It reflects the complex, multi-dimensional nature of volunteering, which is very important, and provides governments, member states, that is, development partners, as well as those who are interested in this field with the investor-accepted framework for measuring the vital yet often unseen contribution of volunteers. And we have looked at a number of volunteer, not only aspects to include into this give. And we also consulted a number of existing indices such as the Human Development Index, the Multidimensional Poverty Index of UNDP, the Mo Ibrahim Governance Index. There are several indices that we looked at, including the Gender and Equality Index of UN Women. So we looked at a number of indices and tried to see how we could structure and construct an index like this one, and how this would contribute to making the work of volunteers visible, comparable, and policy relevant. Because increasingly governments, member states are saying they want to see the value before they can make an effort to invest in volunteering. The Global Index of Volunteer Engagement, is a very simple, straight index, a composite index structured around 4 variables or dimensions. It looks at the individual benefits of volunteering. This is very important. For many years, when we look at volunteers, we see them as giving, but what are the benefits that are accrued to the individual? We looked at the community. This is the other variable, the community benefits of volunteering, as well as the economic that Vlad was talking about, and the enabling environment, the infrastructure that enables volunteering, particularly at the country level, where you consider issues such as policies, such as laws. Hi, Professor. I am doing your job here for a fee.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I think I heard what you said, and it's correct. And I think I could not even have said better than you. So please go ahead. Yeah, if you want me to add, then I can add in afterwards.
All right, thank you. So those are the 4 dimensions for the index, and then we have the indicators and the sources of data, and we hope that what we've produced right now, which we've published in the SW Viera 2026, is a framework, and the next step is to work on the actual index. That's the work before us. That's the next step. So UNV and its partners, the University of Pretoria, are in the process now of elaborating the framework into a full-fledged index. Probably you can take forward now in moving forward, Professor Manda.
Yeah, thank Tapiwa, and really, I do apologize, for the poor communication. But I think I have heard already, from Marty. I have heard already, I think from Bianca and I think Vladimir, in terms of measurements of volunteering, and I think they've talked, I think more or less, what the GIVE does. So I think the first slide of these 3 slides that are here are really just trying to confirm on what I think they've said, in terms that we will need to go beyond just to count the number of hours, just to count the number of volunteers, and look about volunteer in sort of I think manifest, where we are looking at the impact on people, the impact on communities, the impact on the economies. So that is the gap that I think GIVE things doing or is trying to do. And as a start, we have come up with let's say 4 dimensions. And I know that some people would say maybe I think those are not enough, but at least we needed to have somewhere where we can start. So we thought those 4 dimensions that Tapiwa has already said those are enough at the moment, and we will do, maybe in the future, we will do add more based on the data availability. And so as of now, we have a tool or a framework, but it needs to have some meat. So that meat that we will need to actually put in is we need to implement it in a way that it is fully fledged as an index. And so in the next 2-3 years, that's what we will be doing. So we'll be talking to people from government, and I'm happy that I think Vladimir is here, because we are going to rely on them from the ILO to help us to talk to people from the NSOs in terms of their data, how best that we can use. So that those steps that are in the next few months, those that are very, 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 very crucial, where is the data, what type of data is there, then from there, whatever we can get, then we would compute. It speaks on the same level as the other indices, because it can be an index if it does go in the other direction. So that will be, our next task. It is not easy, but we have got people UNV, people from UNDP, people from ILO. We are going to rely on their support in terms of in terms of how to partner with member states and the other stakeholders. So Tapiwa, I think that's all that I wanted to add. Tapiwa, I'm done.
Great. So we are conscious of time, and we would like to have time to address some of the questions that we know you have added to the chat. So thank you for engaging with the topic. So very briefly, we wanted to give you a sense of what the key areas of recommendations are in this report. And as you can see from this slide, we're getting really to the very basic questions that should be asked when we're talking about improving the strategies, the approaches, and the ways of conducting volunteer measurement. So it's not that complicated. It's actually down to the basics of why, what, how, who, when, where. So these questions, they are distilled in the recommendations of the report in chapter 8. And you can see there recommendations targeted to specific groups like academic institutions, national statistical offices, and UN member states, for example. Going back to this idea of understanding, first, why do we need to measure? What's the purpose of that? What can measurement do? Not as an end in itself, but as a tool to allow organizations, individuals, communities to have the information that is needed to move forward and to continue investing, for example, in volunteering, as we have mentioned before. What needs to be measured is precisely accounting for this diversity of forms, of ways of volunteering, and different understandings. How? Different methodologies, tools, and approaches. And the next webinars, they will have more examples as well to contribute to these debates and to allow everyone to engage more deeply with the different ways of conducting measurements that I'm sure many of you here in this call are very familiar with. Who, going back to the question of how we engage different people in the process, including volunteers themselves as co-creators of this knowledge and practice, when starting with the measurement from the very outset, not as an afterthought or as a monitoring exercise only, but actually thinking about it from the beginning, and where basically acknowledge again something that I think all of the speakers have mentioned here today, the importance of the context-specific understandings and not missing evidence from countries and contexts that have been historically sidelined in debates about measurement more broadly. So on that note, we know we're tight on time, but we would like to tackle some of the questions that have been
Great, thanks, Bianca. And thank you everyone for questions. We won't get through all of them. Please do come to the following webinars because we'll be exploring some of them in more detail. I would also say it is fine to reach out to people you've encountered on this call who may be able to kind of direct you to further things. But I wanted to pick up and respond to three really good questions that we've been posed. And I'm sorry, I probably won't be able to go through everyone's names as I do this, but the first question was about a measurement question in Pakistan. And the question posed was, how do we adopt frameworks to understand some of the volunteering participation in Pakistan that the person asking the question is engaged with? And what I thought was really interesting is how do we adapt them? Because most of the volunteering is informal and community-based volunteering. And I think in the way that the question is posed, we have a really interesting challenge because we're having to adapt frameworks. Well, why are we having to adapt frameworks? What that tells us is that the frameworks we have are not suitable for those kinds of volunteering, but we should not accept that as a starting position. So by saying, well, we need to adapt other frameworks, we need to be really careful that we don't say some frameworks are the main frameworks, but then we adapt them a little bit for other things, because actually, all of the kind of volunteering, so much of the volunteering we know about globally is actually informal and community-based. So I would say in that case, have a look at the Uganda project. The Uganda project has some great examples of how you work on how you locally define what volunteering means so that you can capture the right kinds of volunteering. There was a second question about Nigeria, and about how we measure the economic value of volunteering. And if you look in SWVR, there's a great example of the Viva toolkit developed by our brilliant friend, Nick Ockenden. And that gives you a really good tool for measuring economic value. But what I would also say is be very careful. Why do we need to do that? Who decided that economic value is a good contribution? The fact that volunteering may be a form of work is a useful thing. Does it mean that the next step is we have to attach economic value? And what are the risks with that? And then one final example, really nice example about the ways in which measurement is connected to influence. And I think that's a really important question. There is a great example in SWVR of how that worked in Togo. Please do have a look at that case study and the ways in which evidence and data was collected to shape and influence, particularly in relation to health and education, and leading to a decentralization process. Another really great example. And the SWVR is full of those examples. But what I would also say is when we're thinking about how you might use measurement to influence, then you need to think about who you are trying to influence. What kind of evidence and data will work for them? And also, perhaps, what kind of evidence and data might get them to be challenged, to get them to think differently and know that it is not only about numbers. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mark. And look, time is not on our side, and we would like to align ourselves with the time as much as possible. Today, we've had a very great discussion and conversation around this very difficult topic of volunteer measurement. And I would like to inform you that we've just started. We are planning a number of webinars on this subject. The next webinar will be on the 16th of April on the title of Measuring the Value of Measuring to Individuals and Communities. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we design the webinars to different audiences so that we can have better understanding of how the report can be used by different communities, different individuals, different organizations in their context. So I'm very happy that this seminar, which was a kind of opener to everything that we are going to do, has managed to attract interest, has managed to make sure that we are on track in as far as the dissemination of the report and its contents are concerned. I would also like to mention that the questions that have come through, quite a lot of them, will not just be discarded. We are going to use these questions to design the next, in terms of design and content of the next webinar. So please tune on to the next sessions coming up. Let me end by thanking the speakers from the Northumbria University Research Consortium. Thank you very much, Professor Matt, Bianca, and Maxine. And also from the Pretoria University, Professor Manda, and we are sorry about technology there, and to our good friend, Vladimir Ganta from the ILO in Geneva, and also those behind the scenes, Derek and Emilia. Thank you very much, colleagues, for this a very interesting webinar. The topic of volunteer measurement is new, is interesting, and we've just started. So let's be on this journey. Where I come from, we say, when you talk alone. But when you sing with everybody. So I hope we've started the song now. Let's continue singing. Thank you very much. And wherever you're sitting, have a good and nice evening, good afternoon, good morning, and let's continue this journey together. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Tapiwa.